Hello, it is the third to final episode of Effluvium here on YouTube. After 3 years and quite a body of work behind me, might I add, we're reaching the finish line as I start to create content on Substack. If you've noticed in the comments, I have posted my Substack link. If it doesn't work, you can copy and paste it, jjcolborn.substack.com, as I will be doing my podcast there, which will also curiously be named Effluvium, starting in autumn. And I am delighted to introduce to you all Daisy Bow. You can check out the bio in the description for our live stream today, as I would like to reserve much of our time for some spirited discussion, including some rapid fire questioning, which is always a fun time. I'm up for the challenge. And we're going to take a look at the chat here. We have Filippo Morelli. Great to see you. And we have here a piano keyboard, what appears to be a trumpet or cornet, some type of horn, and maracas, if I am not mistaken. Pat Lester, lovely to see you here. And Ricardo, thank you so much for subscribing to Substack as my first paid subscriber. It is an honor, considering I haven't even posted any paid content yet. So now the pressure is on to post paid content to get some of you to subscribe, to do a paid subscription. Thank you very much. This is actually a Mass Audubon cap. Mass Audubon is an organization here where I live in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts that owns properties throughout the state, protecting different plots of land, large and small. They have sanctuaries where you can visit, nature centers. I am a member. I have been a member for about 14 years now. So this is my hat that I got as a gift one year for being a member. And it's mostly because I've been lazy and I haven't really fully shaved my head. So I just wanted to put this on my head. Thank you very much, though. So we have 12 people tuned in. We are going to start this conversation momentarily. Oh, that was an abrupt end. I didn't mean to do that. We'll let it play. Here we go. There, thank you. Sorry about that. Theme music. Okay, well, let's get this conversation started. I want everyone to welcome Daisy Bow. Thank you very much for accepting my invitation.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for inviting me. It makes me feel a little bit more legit and less of an imposter.
We were just talking before we went live about imposter syndrome, which I've known to
terrible. It's absolutely terrible.
Feel that way as well amongst so many esteemed individuals in the fragrance community. But we're going to have a great chat. I just want to remind folks, if you would like to support this channel, you can buy me a coffee, or 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. The buy me a coffee link is in the description. All right. And hi, Emily. Great to see you. I'm so glad that you could join us live here. So let's get this started. So do you want to start with the rapid fire questions? Why do we do that?
Sure. I have 5, possibly 6 of them. And
you're prepared.
Yeah.
I actually am going to just
wing it.
Wing it. Yeah.
Winging it is okay. All right. So my first question is, if your perfume collection caught fire, what would you grab before you ran out the door?
Oh, wow. I rue the day that anything like that would happen, but the first ones that come to mind, and they may come as a surprise to some people and not a surprise to others, but Idriss Elegant, Chipotle Rouge, Léa Delienne from Miller Harris, Eau de Hermès. How many? What am I limited to? I already did 3.
One.
I'm such a great listener. I get an A for listening, right?
Like one perfume and maybe.
Oh God! I'm like, what 10 am I going to take?
I know exactly what I would grab, and I know exactly what my personal item would be. I would leave my laptop because that can be replaced.
That can be replaced.
Cloud, yeah.
Okay, so if it had to be one perfume in one item or just
Yes.
one perfume in one item, oh God.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about the flammable material. You have to get out of there. You can't let
Right, right.
this.
Especially how much flammable material I've accumulated over time. Um, and it's just one, and I know that the place is about to burn down with me in it.
It's about to
I
explode.
would say, God, I would just say my vintage bottle of L'air de Rien.
Ah, okay, all
Isn't that
right.
strange? I would
No.
just say, because I really think that at that point, I would be thinking about less about perfume
Mm,
and more about just preserving like the things that are even more important. So
mm.
I would grab at least one photo album of photographs from my youth, with preferably
Okay.
the one that I would that I know has more pictures of my mom. So
Oh,
I would grab that one. Yeah.
oh, that's so sweet. Now I feel like a monster thinking about what my personal item would be. The perfume that I would grab before my entire apartment exploded into flames would be Guerlain's Iris Ganache.
Ooh.
And that was the first perfume I ever bought that like broke the over $200 mark. And once that like barrier was breached, there was no going back. And the personal item I would grab would be my autographed photo of Mr. T. So there's definitely a story behind that. When I was in graduate school, I heard that Mr. T was signing autographs at, this is back in like the day, back
Yeah.
in the day. He was signing autographs at Planet Hollywood.
Right.
And if you brought a canned good in, he would sign something for you. So I brought in some canned food and I waited in line, and there were like a bunch of people behind me and in front of me. No one knew who Mr. T was, and the people in front of me, one of the girls asked the other, "Who is this guy?" And the woman she asked said, "I think he's an astronaut." And I laughed, but of course I just sort of held it
Astronaut.
in. And then when I got to Mr. T, like his ring said like 1-800 collect, and it took him like 4 times to spell my name right. So yeah, that's coming with me, with along with my bottle of Guerlain.
I love that.
Hmm.
Well, I pity the fool
You
who
pity
does
the
not
poor.
know who Mr. T is.
It's true.
Um,
It's true. I mean, like, because I teach, I'm constantly, reminded of how old I am. But it's part of the process, right?
I suppose most people under the age of 30 have no clue who Mr. T is. And I'm being pretty generous. I think we're both around the same age and we were in elementary school.
I think they are kind of rediscovering the 90s and early 2000s, I think, probably because that's the generation of their parents.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So that's my first question.
And I now have to think of my first question off the cuff. Tom, thank you very much for the comment.
Well, oh yeah, you have to grab the dog. Absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to look at that here too.
Mhm.
Bandit and his
Well,
dog. My question is, if you were to if you were to be able to only smell one more flower in your lifetime,
one more
what,
flower.
one more type of flower, like what type of flower? What flower would that be?
Like what do you mean by one more
So
type
if
of
you
flower?
knew that for the rest of your life you wouldn't be able to smell any other flowers again, and you had a choice of one flower that you could smell one
For the
last
rest of my
time
life?
for the rest of your life, that would be it. Like you won't be able to smell flowers ever again.
Freesia.
I like that answer. That's a good one.
Yeah, I feel like it's something that um, is fairly easygoing. It's very pleasant. It always puts a smile on your face. And yeah, I don't think I would get tired of it. It would be one of those things that I could tune out, but also tune into when I wanted to, and not have it be annoying or bothersome or boring.
And you'd have a chance to sit with it for a while,
Mm,
but it would be the last time.
yeah. I
Yeah.
think that rose I would probably feel overpowered by, and I think that I might also feel a little bit mm, like maybe I don't know, like the rose would be like I would be beneath it in some way, and I don't want to really live with an inferiority complex for the rest of my smelling existence. So probably not rose. Jasmine, I think would overwhelm me, as would tuberose. But I think freesia is just sort of nice and easy.
Have you ever experienced diptyque's Ophrisia?
I
Diptyque has,
have, I have.
yeah, that's a very nice Frisia
It is.
soliflor.
I feel like it's kind of I have to revisit it, like I was thinking about so when I was kind of thinking a little bit and I was at home and kind of like packing my bag for the afternoon because as you can tell, I don't know if you can tell, but I'm still on campus.
Yeah,
So finals have started and it's sort of a really busy time on campus. So I'm kind of coming here, after a long day. But when I was packing up my bags, I grabbed this.
hmm,
And this is a notebook. It's actually my very, very first perfume notes notebook. So I think that this dates back to 2010.
oh,
So
really?
we're talking about like the heyday of second wave perfume blogging, which makes it
Yeah,
sound a lot more legitimate than probably Warren's or is. But in any case, I thought I haven't opened this obviously in over a decade. But I thought it might be kind of fun to take a look at it now. It's sort of the perfume lover's equivalent of pulling out your middle school diary and seeing how embarrassing it was. So, you know,
I'd love it. I'd love it. Why don't we do this? Why don't we just sort of weave in the like questions throughout the live stream? It'll be like,
sure,
okay, now I'm going to ask you. We'll do,
sure,
we'll,
absolutely,
yeah, we'll just
absolutely.
do it that way, and
Mhm,
and we'll segue into this for now. I'd love to
mhm.
to
Did
hear
you
some of
also
your.
like when you started getting into perfume, like what so when I started getting into it, I had always been interested in scents. I'd always been interested in fragrance, but it wasn't something that I really thought about intellectually
Yeah.
until I was maybe to the point where I was desperate to procrastinate.
Mhm.
So I would be always very particular about my fragrance, but I was pretty much like a one fragrance kind of woman. I was very monogamous,
Right.
but then sort of like the polygamy, polyamorous perfume lover in me didn't really begin until I started
Yeah.
thinking a lot about these, like what constituted a good or a bad perfume. And to kind of catalog my journey, I started keeping these like journals on these in these moleskin journals, which weirdly, I think the plastic cover, because it's not leather anymore, it's
Yeah.
starting to degrade. So it's like weirdly sticky and it's probably going to, give me a disease. But in any case, it's first of all, I will say that my handwriting was much better, probably because I wrote more and typed
Mm,
less when
mm,
I
mm.
started this. And then secondly, it's kind of interesting to see the very first fragrance I have here. So this was started in 2010.
Mhm.
And I started getting into fragrance much earlier than this, but again, like it wasn't until I had to kind of work on something that I wasn't particularly motivated, about, and then that kind of encouraged me to do something else. So the very first fragrance I have here is the Different Company's Celle de Vetiver. Do you remember this
Oh,
one? Right?
I remember that had its moment for a while around that
Yeah, the
time.
Celine
Yeah.
Elena, it launched in, like, 2006, and, yes, it's it's embarrassing to read.
Read it.
No, 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 it's a little bit like when you open up books that you, wrote in, like, in college, and you're like, "Man, I didn't understand this book at all." So
not
here
even not even a little excerpt.
I
Mm.
think that my very, astute observation is that it was very salty.
Yes,
I
it's a
know,
good observation.
but I
And
mean,
that
in all honesty, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was just trying to, at the time, put words to something that was just so difficult to express. And we all know that there isn't a language for olfaction. You know, like for example, I can pick up my phone and be like, "That's red," and we all can see that color, and we have that color. You
It
know, in our
actually matches the background too.
phone.
That shows. Love it.
So, yeah, so I can say that, and I was like, okay, that's red. And if I tell someone it's red, you know, I have a red phone case without even showing it to you, you can kind of visualize what that
You
is.
can
But
visualize it. Yeah.
when it comes to what we smell, we don't really have that. We have to use metaphors and similes and all this kind of poetic language. And
Right.
so I think that this was really kind of my attempt to grasp that. And then the other thing that really strikes me about this notebook is, and I've kind of come around a little bit full circle about this, but this is kind of this focus on different notes. And I think it
Mhm.
was because I was really trying to figure out what exactly it was that I was smelling. Of course, like now I know that the notes that you have are, part and parcel of the way that a fragrance is marketed. But
Right.
then again, like, I mean, it you have to start somewhere. And if those marketing lists of notes were completely off, then it would be a hard sell, because people wouldn't be able to kind of picture what it is that they would be getting or what they're expecting. So I've come a little bit full circle about that. But here, just trying to kind of figure out like what vetiver is, what geranium is. The next fragrance I smelled was Une Rose, Miles Une Rose. Mhm. Yeah. So I have here um, huge, big rose that crumbles into potpourri. Mhm. So how about yourself? Like, how did you start? Do you also have a notebook like this?
I had something of a notebook at one time. Well, I do currently, and I've had them off and on. I've had journals. I've used them. I still have a moleskin that I write in now and then. I wish I was more disciplined with adding to it. In this age where we don't write as much, I try to push myself to write as much as I can to keep that.
Oh, you're prolific. You do a great job.
I meant actually physically writing, like with
Ah,
there's writing and then there's actually writing with a pen, and I'm trying to do more of that because I really do feel like it stimulates parts
oh,
of your brain that are not stimulated when you're typing, so I try to
absolutely.
keep that intact. As far as writing about fragrance, the earliest origins of that, you'd be surprised to hear that it was more recent than my actual enthusiasm for fragrance beyond, monogamous, signature scent. I really got into fragrance 2007, 2008,
Oh, so about the
but
same time.
about the same time. Yeah. So I know what was the zeitgeist at the time. I know what was popular, all of my favorite indie or niche brands were
Mhm,
from that time period. I don't,
mhm.
like I got into, I still remember the first time that I walked into a Barney's, being kind of feeling like I'm kind of like a stranger in a strange land, because at that time I really couldn't afford anything from
Oh, no.
Barney's
Oh, I can
at that age. Um, and I went to the perfume counter and I was absolutely gobsmacked by how many different types of fragrance lines there were that I had never heard of in my life. And it just felt like being in a candy shop where the most spectacular sensory delights were around me, and it was more than I ever expected from fragrance at all. Because before that, it was more just sort of like my experience was going into like cool sort of like drugstores that still had that old fashioned,
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
fragrance section. Like there
The
were a few
designer
places.
imposters body sprays, iconic.
But even like the ones where like they still had like like more mom and pop places, like this place called Colonial Drug, and they still
Mhm.
carried like all of these old fashion fragrances, classic fragrances. That was like my probably my earliest fascination with older fragrances happened before that, but I didn't really develop an obsession yet. And that's where I was buying things like Canon,
Mm,
and
canoe.
um, I bought a bottle of Equipage by Hermes and
Mm,
Abbey Rouge and Vetiver, Guerlain Vetiver. But I had like a modest collection. And then I'd have like these scents that I would wear, pretty much a signature scents. Like I had like the Helmet Long Eau de Cologne, which at the time I didn't realize would be such a highly coveted fragrance. This is back in like 2000, 2001. That was one of my favorites. The Marc Jacobs, which I learned was just sort of
OG,
like,
Big Gardenia, loved it.
this one was like, it was Diptyque before I knew Diptyque. It was Diptyque's Philosopus before I knew Philosopus, but like more of a budget friendly version of it.
Hmm.
Um, so I wore that, and it really, I feel like the turning point was when I went into that Barney's and I saw two different brands. I saw Serge Lutens, and just visually striking, the presentation, just I loved it aesthetically before I even smelled anything. And then Frederick Malle, because both of them were, I mean, those were really popular at the time. We're talking 2007,
Yeah,
2008.
totally.
And the sales assistant was really helpful and trying to find something that would suit my interest. She gave me samples of Ambo Sultan. This is like 2008 or so, early 2008. So Ambo Sultan, Cèdre, Rousse, um, oh God, Arabi, and the name is escaping me, but it's really popular, and I loved it then, and I still love it now. It's the
Is it
tobacco.
Shirky?
I beg your pardon?
Shirky?
Shirgi, exactly. Thank you. Yeah, and she gave me a sample of that. So there's about five different samples, and I would just keep going back to get more samples. Like, oh, I never heard of this one. Can I try this out? But because like I really just didn't want to spend too much money at the time. And then eventually I started buying full bottles of fragrances like Frederick Malle's Vetiver Extraordinaire. I
Mm,
went through a whole Creed kick. So this was the time when they still had like the gray bottle ones, and I didn't even know they weren't referred to as gray bottle, not gray bottle, gray cap ones, like the ones
mhm.
that were all discontinued shortly after Aventus became commercially successful. I loved like original Vetiver and Tabarone and Green Valley. So I was kind of like a frag head, but I didn't involve myself at all with writing or blogging or anything. I just read and absorbed other blogs. Like that was for years. And then in 2013, 2014, I was curious about making fragrance. So I have this whole other time period where I was an autodidact of sorts, learning how to compose perfume. It started off with natural perfume, but I felt too restricted.
Mhm.
Shortly thereafter, I went over to the dark side and fell in love with synthetics as much as naturals, and
It's
I
not the
studied
dark.
that for a while.
Well, number one, if you stay in the naturals palette, there's so much you can do.
Yeah,
But it's kind of like limiting the number of colors that an artist can play with.
yeah,
And even though that can be challenging and stimulating, I mean, these materials are out there, so why not play with them a little bit? I love listening to you talk about this kind of journey and the generosity of these sales associates because I remember this as well. So when I really started to, so my journey with fragrance, it kind of began in childhood more or less because both my mother and my mother is still obsessed with fragrance, and my grandmother was a very heavy Chanel number 5 wearer. So
yeah.
she pretty much every iteration of Chanel number 5. And my mother, she is a white florals person. So
Oh
it's
yeah,
really big, really huge white florals. She loves the Frederick Malle Carnal Flower and the Dias and Durga Durga. It's kind of and also the Byredo Flower Head. These are the kinds of things that my mom loves.
right.
So I grew up in a very kind of heavy cloud of my mother's perfume. But I hadn't really thought about my own tastes until the first time that I studied abroad in France. So a lot of times people ask me, how did I end up in academia? And after cheeky answer of poor life decisions. Like I
Eh,
say that the majority of the root of how I ended up in academia is number one. I always loved teaching. I loved teaching. I loved communication. I loved being a student, and I always kind of wanted to be on the other side of that. And now that does mean that, obviously there's a kind of ceiling when it comes to pay and also opportunity, jobs, things like that. But
right.
I love interacting with my students. I love working with them. But when you're a graduate student, kind of, working towards your degree, you really do not have very much money at all.
Mhm.
But my taste for the high end vastly outstripped my beer budget. So what I would do is I would really think hard about the one bottle I wanted to invest in. And I would only buy one bottle at a time because it was all that I could afford. And I would really be to the point of obsession about it because it was something so precious. And also, it was what my next 6 months were going to smell like. And I was so grateful that in New York, I had these different stores. And then looking back, they were probably super annoyed with me. And so I really
Mhm.
appreciate they didn't come off as being annoyed, but looking back, they were probably like, girl, buy something or leave. But in any case, uh, they like they did give me a lot of samples, and now I think they probably just wanted me to go away. But
Get you out of their face.
but
I would feel that way too.
yes, but, at the time, I remember getting all of these different samples and just kind of putting them in a drawer and not knowing what to do with them. And then it came to the point where I was finishing my degree and I was very much not enthusiastic about it. I wasn't enthusiastic about the topic that I ultimately ended up with. I wasn't
Yeah,
enthusiastic about my program. And so in order to kind of motivate myself, I decided that self-torture would be the best thing. So
I've
I
been there too.
right? So I locked myself in like a cage in the sub basement of my university library. And I basically wouldn't allow myself to see sunlight unless I got something done, you know. But what ends up happening is that you just end up procrastinating by looking things up and then going
Oh
down
my
these different
God.
rabbit
Yeah.
holes. So every day, to compensate for the fact that there was no window, I would dig out one of these samples and I would wear a different one every single day. And that's kind of where these journals came from. So the first thing that I would just grab. And sometimes I really loved what I wore that day, and sometimes I really hated it. But it was a very kind of clean environment. There weren't any competing smells except for maybe like moisture from the basement and old
Mm,
books, but for the most part, fairly neutral, cold. And it was a good place to kind of focus on what I was smelling because
yeah.
I was running away for what I had to do so hard.
I love
But I was super grateful for those samples, and even now when I go to these stores, because a lot of them are still around. Thankfully, some of them are sadly gone,
yeah.
but some of them are still there with the same owners who have, obviously their businesses have developed and sort of evolved, but it's kind of this strange interaction because I feel so grateful to them that they tolerated and placated this like broke graduate student, and I wouldn't necessarily be thinking about something like fragrance if not for that generosity.
Yeah. Yeah. I guess I didn't get into how I started writing because you know what? It really had to do with the pandemic itself because I was starting to shortly before the pandemic, I started to collect fragrances again. I just kind of caught the bug because I had it in my mind because at that point it was about like almost 6 years that I was studying perfume and exploring that I thought to myself, in order to really better understand
And you were
fragrance.
completely self-trained, like you
Yeah, I didn't do
mentor,
any
you went
formal
through a
training.
program.
Yeah, I didn't have any kind of formal program. I had like some mentors through different forums and I got to know other independent perfumers but really pretty much self-taught. I picked up a lot of different literature, did a lot of research. I'm pretty good with the research. That's one of my strong points. But I knew that I wasn't ready. I knew I wasn't ready. I was determined not to rush it, because I learned early on when I was starting to share things with people that it wasn't getting the response that I hoped for. And I did a little bit of inward,
Mhm.
exploring, like, okay, this is, I'm very eager, but I haven't fine tuned things. So I think I want to just refrain and from sharing until I feel more confident. So short of the story
Mhm.
is, I decided at one point, probably 2019, I think it was 20, it was right before the
Wow, that is
pandemic,
relatively like not that long
not
ago.
long not long ago, that I was like, in order for me to really better understand perfume, I want to really understand perfume in general, like the whole history of it. I want
Hmm.
to smell as much as I can.
Yeah, that's the best way.
Smelling as much as I can, and I did, and then some. Now I have like this museum of fragrance. Like it's like a wildly impractical amount of fragrance
Flammable.
for reference. No,
Hmm.
not even. I know realistically, I would never be able to wear all of it. There's some things that I don't even get around to wearing for over a year, but they are my collection, much in the same way people collect things. And it's like, it's all not only for, it's a passion, but not only that, it's a reference. It's like I feel
Hmm.
like I'm curating a museum, and I'm learning about all of these fragrances that had been released throughout history to get a better understanding. And I felt like that was sort of like my field work before I were to ever get back into making fragrance.
Hmm.
And that's the one thing I noticed is in myself, that that background was lacking in me and in a lot of other people who were budding independent perfumers. Like, we didn't really know. They're still out there. And it's like, I I don't necessarily feel like you have to. You can, you don't have to. But for me personally, I felt like I needed to before I were to ever embark on even so much as releasing my own brand.
Hmm.
So that's how it started. And then I just, for the fun of it, started writing things down. And then I started typing things. Then I started sharing things on Fragrantica,
Hmm.
reviews. And then it just sort of
Blossomed.
blossomed out of that over 5 years. And now here we are.
Mm.
So that's kind of how it happened. I wasn't one of those early bloggers. I was heavily influenced by those early bloggers like Barbara Herman and Bois de Jasmine and Stephen
The
Matthews
makeup,
and,
the makeup alley forums,
yep,
like
all of them.
the
Yeah. The Gentleman's Gazette, all these different things, like anything that I could, read about fragrance for a
talking about
number
like
of years.
Milieu and like also her autobiography, amazing.
Yeah.
It's kind of fun when you talk about blogging. We talked a little bit about like the second wave of perfume blogging. And I think that this is when a lot of us kind of got into fragrance because it was a little bit more accessible. There's something about those kinds of early forums that
Yeah.
feel are intimidating to someone getting into it for the first time because you have
Right.
all of these people who are very active. They all know each other by their handle, and it's a little bit like trying to butt your head into a conversation that is in the middle of happening. It's just really difficult. But there was a level of accessibility for the next wave that came after that, especially for people who were blogging on WordPress. And for me, I was coming to the fragrance community from a different point of view. So my dissertation was on French food and identity, and that was partly prompted because I had to reframe my initial idea for a dissertation to this one. I don't regret it, but it definitely moved me into this sort of like part of my life where I'm thinking about the senses. I'm thinking about taste and also related smell and these things that in many ways when you talk to kind of hardcore academics they're devalued a little bit. I
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
remember when I first started writing, there was such a resistance to writing about food or fragrance because of its ties to commercialism. Like, first of
Mm.
all, perfume is a commercial product. So I did have people say things like, what are you going to do? Sell stuff? Or if I was writing about food, people would say, well, what are you going to do? Are you going to write restaurant reviews or recipes? As if this is sort of a lower kind of writing. But in any case,
Yeah.
um, when I started my food blog, because I never had a perfume blog, when I started my food blog, it was for two reasons. Number one, by the time that I had gotten to the dissertation, it was pretty apparent that it had been so long since I had written in English, I had kind of forgotten how. And that sounds ridiculous to say, but there's a certain level of academic writing, and I
Mm.
pretty much stuck where I was when I left, college. And whereas my writing in French had developed and gotten much better, my writing in English was like, so I thought that a blog would be a good way to get back into it. And I was really encouraged because I had a friend who was on WordPress and she's like, well, I'll be the one who reads it. And then amazingly, it kind of grew and grew and grew and grew and grew. And then as I started to go down this perfume rabbit hole, I had my foot in two worlds. I had my foot in food, and then I also had my foot in fragrance. And I
Yeah.
started to notice there were very two different personalities that were emerging. Like the food and beverage back then was pretty much dominated by Anthony Bourdain types, so loud,
Yeah.
ironic, sarcastic, sardonic. And these were people who were extroverts, dog people, fast talking, fast walking. And then the perfume friends that was making, they were very different, much more introspective,
Right.
more quieter, cat people. And so I think that initially I must have been some kind of, I don't know, like hyper weirdo, kind of barging my way, blabbering to these people who are enjoying their tranquility. Now I think it's sort of become much more fragmented in terms of these different communities that are.
Yeah. In general, communities seem fragmented. Yeah.
Yeah, but I remember that, and as I've gotten kind of older, it's not that, I don't still have a connection to food, but my heart is kind of drifting more towards thinking about fragrance because it feels calmer and it feels a little bit more, where I am, in my life, just a little bit less chaotic, a little bit less, like uh, bad for your health.
In a way, even though there's some, clean living chemophobes online that would have you think differently.
So, I mean, that's like a whole thing. I know that we message back and forth about how ridiculous that is. I honestly feel that a lot of that has to do with the fact that the fragrance industry and also the food industry in particular in the United States, because food and fragrance are, it's the same industry. When you look at how processed food is, especially in the United States,
Yeah.
there's something really scary about that level of interference with something that you put in your body and have this very
Right.
intimate relationship with. It's scary,
Right.
I think.
Right.
It's like a David Cronenberg movie, really, but it's like on the face,
Spot on. Yeah. Yeah.
you
It's
know.
chilling. It's
And
chilling.
and so I think that that carries over a lot. Like people think that chemicals are related somehow to processing, over processing, and then they think about all of these different things that could be harmful to your health, and that kind of goes into this dialogue that people have mentally. How do I not, expose myself to things that are toxic?
And I think about where that comes from. That comes from a place of feeling protected, feeling secure, feeling
Mhm.
safe.
Yeah.
And in our environment, there just seems to be so many different perceived hazards, and whether or not they're actually hazardous.
Hmm.
We're also bombarded with a barrage of information that may be accurate or inaccurate. And it's tough enough just facing that and then having to be responsible for our own intake of that information, determining whether or not it is, misinformation or disinformation. And I think that also when it's this economy of attention as well, where we take in this information, but it is not designed to be taken in a more of a critical sort of reading between the lines. It's like it's face value, and then you just take it as truth.
I mean,
Um,
I know for myself,
yeah,
just working with my students, that the really big challenge is that it's hard for them to kind of look at something and determine if something is a credible source or
yeah,
something that isn't. And one thing that I do try to communicate to my students is, can they identify like bombastic language?
right.
Bombastic language is usually a dead giveaway that you've got
Mm,
someone writing from an agenda, you've got someone who definitely has a specific point of view and a motivation, and may not be interpreting the data in a way that is objective. And of course,
right,
objectivity is always a little bit of a tricky thing to talk about because it's a little bit of, sort of like an impossible thing. No one is completely 100% objective. But
right, right, right,
I do think that the ability to be able to look at different sources and weigh their credibility is something that we've lost or we're not communicating enough to students, and ultimately those students become adults in society. It doesn't necessarily help that both the food and the fragrance industry, I mean, the food and fragrance industry are really opaque, and
this is true. Yes.
they don't, I mean, they go out of their way to just obscure the science behind everything. One thing that I talk to my students about is the example of Tropicana orange juice. And I always ask them, don't you think it's a little strange that when I say Tropicana orange juice, you instantly know exactly what the texture is, what the taste is? You know that if you
The
buy it,
color too.
exactly a particular profile. And don't you think it's odd with rainier seasons, sunnier seasons, seasons where there might be a bigger harvest or a lower harvest, the orange juice is always the same? I mean, wouldn't it follow that if it was truly a natural product, it would vary depending on what the
Right, right.
and it just like this light bulb goes off in their head, like, wow, like the science that, I mean, it's behind everything.
Yeah, yeah. Well, the way that it's reconstituted, the
Yeah,
way that they add the color back, and it's a
absolutely.
uniform color. It is the Tropicana color. You're
Mhm.
absolutely right. That's why whenever I think about consumption, I'm much more concerned about what we ingest than even things that we put on our skin, because the level of exposure and safety is much more of a concern when your body is having to process and metabolize things rather than the levels of absorption. And of course we're going to have toxins that are exposed to our skin. I mean, we're dealing with the sun, that is potentially a toxin, and that is just the most natural thing possible. It is what is given
Sun,
life,
water, I mean,
you know.
microplastics are there.
And yeah, yeah, yeah. I wanted to highlight Ricardo's comment here. He says, "JJ, this just randomly. Well, now it's not. It wasn't just. It's 7:32, but I'm so sorry that we're getting around to this now. Randomly reminded me of the lady on Instagram mixing random essential oils to use as perfume because she was all about naturals and didn't like aldehydes.
I think I know who he's talking about. I think you
Yeah, I think we were talking about that video, and she had like the drawer of essential oils. None of them were sitting upright. It was like looking at like a little kid's sort of like crayon drawer where everything is just chaotic. And I do remember her saying like, "Oh, no aldehydes." Like this is the interesting thing. Like people have latched onto aldehydes as if it's like the most dangerous thing you could possibly be exposed to.
I think it's because it's something that just smells so outside of anything that they can put their finger on and saying, like, that smells like an orange, that smells like a flower, that smells like, I mean, that was really the motivation behind the development of Chanel #5, right? You wanted something that smelled like polar wind or polar air.
Yeah,
And that, like when my students, for example, smell aldehydes for the first time, they smell that very metallic, cold, soapy aldehyde that is
yeah,
that's in Chanel #5. A lot of them recoil because it's not something that they've ever encountered before. It's weird, it's strange, it's as if like they were some kind of medieval European seeing an elephant for the first time. They're like, "Whoa, like what is this?"
right. It's very alien, especially when it is not really part of what you smell in perfumes, not nearly as much as it had used to be. And
Mhm.
I'm kind of a chemistry nerd too, and it's funny because like if you really break down like what exactly are aldehydes, I
Oh, there
mean,
are aldehydes and natural,
right. It's
mhm.
like not only even those aliphatic aldehydes, but things like that are everywhere that we're eating and like they found in nature. Like orange does have like there's different aldehydes. Vanilla has vanillin is an aldehyde. So
Mhm.
it's like when people just have these buzzwords like aldehydes are bad. And I think there's also the association that they think it is just, adjacent to formaldehyde, which is just one of like several different
Oh,
types of aldehyde.
never heard about that before. Like
Yeah,
people
I think they think that it's like, oh, some people really think that the aldehydes in fragrance are just like formaldehyde, but formaldehyde doesn't show up in fragrance. It, in fact, hasn't been used in any personal care products in a while. They used to use it for hair tonics and stuff, which is kind of scary to think, but none. It was never used in perfume.
Mhm.
But that's one of the buzzwords, like aldehydes and just flat out saying chemicals, like chemicals as in I like all natural, I don't like chemicals. Like it's a binary, even though it's not a binary at all, because most of nature consists of chemicals. Um, and I think what people are really concerned about are manufactured, quote unquote, man made chemicals.
Oh, well, I mean, I think they're really concerned about the level of processing, like the
Processing.
level
Yeah.
of, like the hand, like man's hand, or man or woman's hand, like in the processing of these. And it
Yeah.
doesn't
Yeah.
really occur to them that if you have a natural, like an essential oil, it can have so many more compounds in this one isolated thing that you can test and make sure it's stable, and you can make sure like the majority of people don't have an allergic reaction. When you
Right.
have these essential oils, it's a little bit of a grab bag what's in there. And it's not something that I personally would use if I didn't have any kind of training whatsoever.
Yeah.
So just to see her kind of pottering around, I mean, I think the one thing that we were kind of laughing about is that she was here and she was kind of mixing these things and she was being, yes, very chefy about it. But
Right.
at the same time, I would never put that on my skin. I mean, to her credit, she did like dilute it with a couple, like drops of jojoba oil, but not nearly enough for what she put
Right,
in
right.
there.
Especially considering some of the oils that she used,
Yeah,
which
I think that drawer was like this deep. And who knows what was in the bottom of that?
yeah,
And some of those oils, I mean, the oils break down, they degrade. I
they
mean,
do. If they, I mean, some of the oils like citrus and herb and spice oils, it's recommended that they're refrigerated if you're
mhm,
not using them right away because
mhm.
of the degradation, and the degradation can be an irritant as well because the chains, the bonds and the chains,
Oh yeah, they
they
break down.
transmogrify, they break, they turn into different chemicals from what they were before. So it's really risky business. And it's funny because people think just because it's naturally derived
Mhm.
that it's inherently safer. But each one of them, each discrete essential oil can have up to 30, 40, or more different chemicals in them, chemical constituents. So
Absolutely.
it's actually much more risky than if you were just using
Or
an isolated chemical component, especially one that's nature identical, because you know that you're only dealing with that one component. Um,
I think that people, they look at that and there's also sort of a DIY element to it
yeah, yeah,
that I think
kind of punk rock.
but I think that they also look at her and they're like, wow, like she's beautiful, she's really gorgeous.
Yeah,
Like, clearly she hasn't, like her skin hasn't fallen off because she's using it. So it must be safe. But everyone has a different tolerance for this. I
yeah,
mean, just because she doesn't break out in a rash doesn't mean that you won't break out in a rash.
right, right. Yeah, that speaks to um, the whole your mileage may vary kind of thing. It's like I can put lavender oil neat on my skin and frankincense oil neat on my skin, but that's because I made sure to do a patch test first
Mhm.
and to see how my skin reacts to it.
I mean,
Um,
didn't you say she'd been doing it for 25 years? So that's like, guess 25 years of patch testing, I guess.
yeah, yeah, but The thing is a lot of people don't realize that's kind of what you should be doing first. And there are certain things you shouldn't even do a patch test for. Like
No,
you should,
true,
there's certain
absolutely,
oils that they
absolutely.
don't even, you shouldn't wear neat at all. There's like a very short, very small handful of those that are generally regarded safe with a patch test that I can count on probably like one hand, maybe two. And most of them, it's like, don't mess around with them.
And wasn't that like 5 inch deep drawer also in her bathroom? So you just think about the different
the
temperatures
the
and
temperature, the moisture, and yeah, not the
humidity.
best place to
Yeah,
be storing.
no, thank you.
Yeah, yeah, it was pretty reckless, but
Yeah. Well, I think that, I mean, it just kind of where I don't think that's ever going to go away.
no,
I think that there will always be that subset that looks a little bit like these DIY kind of fragrances are almost like hacks in a way. I
yeah,
think people who try to hack like the McDonald's McNugget, but you actually use like chicken that isn't reconstituted from
right,
chicken waste.
mechanically pulled, whatever
Exactly,
they call it.
exactly. It's kind of funny. When I was in college, I had a friend of mine who was at a big agricultural Big Ten school, and he was in a food studies program, and he got an internship at McDonald's. And he told me that his job for the summer was to see how little chicken he could put in a chicken McNugget and still have it taste like chicken.
Tastes like a chicken nugget.
Yeah, and I was like, "How little?" And he's like, "If I told you, I have to kill you." And I'm like, "Oh." And
I
then he's
bet it's a really small amount.
probably a really small
Yeah,
amount.
and there's so many ways that you can, that from my knowledge with like food science, that you can recreate the flavor of chicken, and you can even call it naturally flavored
I
chicken.
mean, in a way, it's kind of amazing. One thing that I also talk to my students about is that we have vanilla, right? Vanilla, one of the most popular flavors worldwide. People love it, adore it. It's in everything, hand soap, cream, food, you name it. But there's no way, given how picky the plant
Yeah,
is, that these small little pockets around the world can grow the amount of vanilla that the world demands. So of
no,
course
no way.
you have to do like some fancy upcycling with like, to get vanillin from different other like sources. Um,
Right, right.
but that kind of upcycling is kind of fascinating in a way too.
And if you eat vanilla ice cream, oh, you're eating aldehydes. Better be careful.
I hear you.
Because vanillin is really what, in most vanilla ice cream. And even when they say like all natural vanilla, I mean, a lot of it, I
Definitely.
mean, there may be some, vanilla tincture in it, or, like vanilla bourbon oil. But they're still like nature identical. I mean, there's still vanilla in that can be naturally produced. So just so that a brand can say naturally flavored vanilla, but it's not even from like the vanilla bean. That's
Yeah,
another thing too.
I mean,
Vanillin can be produced.
it's so interesting, and like food and beauty track very much when we think about history. They're on parallel tracks.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
think about post World War II when you start entering the sort of like the Kennedy administration in the United States, where you have this fascination with space, you have this fascination with technology. You see
yeah,
homes beginning to get their first appliances, and everyone has these sort of space age looking fridges and blenders, and
yeah.
are talking about like man being on the moon. There was a real moment where that acceptance and kind of celebration of science turned, and then people started to be really afraid of what was happening to food and then cosmetics. I think about how cookbooks from the Kennedy era, it was extolling convenience. So you had a lot of canned foods, you had a
Right.
lot of frozen foods, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
packages, a lot of mixes, and no one thought anything about it. They thought it was amazing, time
Yeah,
saving.
yeah.
And then there was a real shift, like people were kind of mourning this fantasized past. I think that whenever people are really uncertain about the future, they do kind of think about the past in this
True.
nostalgic way. We're really hitting it right now, I think, in the politics in the US and other places around the world. People are really unhappy with the way modern life is moving. And yeah, I get it. I get it. I don't agree with a lot of the policies, but I understand where the fear comes from.
Yeah, I mean, we could definitely. I don't even think we would have time to do that for our live stream, but you can unpack that and see that the sentiment isn't necessarily bad. It's just people have a difficult time with their attachment to the way things were.
Hmm.
And I know that, I mean, even I do. It can be argued that even with my love of vintage fragrances, there are times where I have been frustrated with modern fragrance because I might have this set of expectations
Hmm.
that are not going to be met because the marketplace is different, the consumer is different, the trends are different. What people want to smell is going to be entirely different from even 30, 20 years ago. Yeah.
This actually leads me to my second lightning round question.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, so name a reformulation that you think is better than the original.
A reformulation better than the original. Okay.
I think this is kind of a trick question, but
Yeah.
yeah.
So there is one, the reformulation of Dior Joule, I think, is actually better than the original, and I will tell you why. So I feel like Joule was sort of the also ran for Dior because Antaeus proved to be popular for Chanel.
Mm-hmm.
And I never really found it to be much of a standout. I'm sure I'll have detractors who will debate me to no end. But what I like when they relaunched Joule is
Mm-hmm.
they gave it this green jasmine quality that freshened it up but still retained its character, which
Mm-hmm.
allowed it to be something other than what it used to be. Like, it was still what it used to be, but there was some, with that reformulation, there was a breath of new life that was
I mean,
imparted into it.
lightness is enabled also by technology. As
Yeah.
technology moves forward, you're able to kind of do more with these. I think that for me, what makes this a little bit of a trick question is that for many of these very, very, very old formulas, even if we were to go to the osmotic and smell them, they wouldn't really smell like what they would have, fresh off of the shelf in 1950, 19 in the 1940s. I mean, they would smell very, very different. And we're getting this kind of aged version of it.
Right.
So I don't really, when people talk about things that they're reformulated, I'm just like, well, yeah, reformulation, but you're also competing with this fantasy idea of what the fragrance might have been like. And it's true that you can smell vintage fragrances and get that. But sometimes you really need to kind of meet the moment, and then the way that the fragrance was made or conceived of before, it probably wouldn't sell. So the one that I thought of was the Callus Becker reformulation of Von Vert.
Oh, which I think is a lovely version, the 90s version.
Really
Yeah.
beautiful, right? It was
Yeah.
fun, it was light, it was green, but it was also happy. And I've smelled the vintage version of Von Vert, and for me, it smells like kind of heavy and sticky and a bit stodgy in a way. But again, it's hard for me to say whether or not that was the formula or whether or not I'm just smelling the age on whatever
Mhm.
sample it is that I'm sniffing. The Von
Yeah.
Vert from Callus Becker, when I think about when Von Vert launched, so that kind of post-war optimism, it carries that. There's this sort of joyfulness, sort of youthfulness. And yes, you very much smell the 80s in there and kind of like a precursor to the 90s. But I do think that it was done really well. And
Yeah.
I had
Yeah.
to think about something that was more wearable. I would definitely go for the Callus Becker version.
Yeah. And I don't know for certain if it had to do with changes in the amount of galbanum that could be used
Probably.
in perfume, if if the percentage limit had changed at the time. But I know that Germain CA
Oh, she has
used
a lot of bases that, you know, we don't
a
really use them anymore.
very high quantity of the galbanum oil in it,
Mhm.
in a way that you very seldom see. I think the only thing that comes close to it in modern time, that, not that I know exactly like the percentage, but like something like Nuit de Bacalit, which is like very
I would say the current formulation of Bondi.
Ah, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
German Cellier creation, still pretty green, still pretty
Yeah.
aggressive.
Bondi.
That's
Yeah.
what hmm
I do think you bring up a really good discussion on vintages themselves. And I have often brought up this theory that those who are getting into vintages with a certain level of enthusiasm, I think that sometimes what they latch onto is that their idea of it being superior
hmm
is because they're actually smelling an aged perfume, and they're developing an affinity for the way that an aged fragrance smells, where there are certain things that,
hmm
and I've mentioned in chemistry, things acetylize and they terpen, they're things turn into terpenes and alcohols turn into acetates. So there's like a different smell to something that's aged over time. And once you really get familiar with vintages along the whole palette of fragrances throughout time, you start to pick up on those things and you understand, like, that's what I'm smelling. It's not like, especially like top notes.
And I mean,
So yeah.
oh,
Oh,
sorry,
go. No, I was just going to say, like, I think some vintage enthusiasts, like, the reason why they think vintages are inherently better is because they're getting so acclimated to just smelling vintages that they're forgetting that what they're smelling is while it might smell great in its own way, it's not exactly, very rarely do you run into something that smells exactly like it did when it was first produced. So
so like walk with me with this because it may be a little bit circuitous, but it kind
yeah,
of
yeah. No,
like
it's fine.
let's see if I'm actually making sense here. So when I think about this question, I often think about first of all smoking and vaping, and then I also think about wine bottles that have a cork versus a screw-on cap. So the thing about smoking is that we have hundreds and hundreds of years of history telling you that if you smoke tobacco, this is how you're going to die, or like how it's going to impact your
Right, right,
life.
right.
But when it comes to vaping, these chemicals that you're inhaling have only been around for how long? Like, who knows what they're actually doing to your body? You just don't have the hundreds and hundreds of years of data that you do. And when I think about fragrances, these old vintage fragrances, this is really before we have this kind of explosion where you have perfume houses actively kind of thinking about new captives and constantly thinking about how technology like AI can help them find even more. Who knows how these things are going to age? I think about like Akagala wood, which is that enzyme wash patchouli. What's that going to be like in 10 or 15
Right.
years? Who knows?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
so at least with these older fragrances, we know exactly what's going to happen when you have a high concentration of like real jasmine. It's going to get darker. It's going to become syrupy. It's going to become, we know exactly what's going to happen. Do we know exactly what's going to happen to ISO E Super in 30 years? It probably would just like smell like, varnish or like nail polish remover or something. But it's going to age completely differently. And I think that kind of search for the past and these past fragrances is also motivated by this search for authenticity in a way. And then the other thing that goes along with that when I think about wine, everyone knows how a cork, like an actual cork, is going to behave in a wine bottle. You keep the wine bottle on its side, it keeps the cork moistened. That moist cork will probably last a while and eventually
Yeah.
you'll swap it out for a new cork. But who knows how these screw on ones are going to be? Like, would you really want to pay thousands of dollars for a wine that has a screw on cap where you don't know whether or not the plastic insert on the inside is going to degrade and like ruin your $10,000 bottle of wine over time. So
Right,
it's
right.
all this kind of uncertainty about what is the longevity of all this new technology that we're
Yeah,
using.
yeah. That's something to really
I know
consider. Yeah.
I took you on a walk. I'm
No,
sorry.
no, it's never too much for me, honestly, because it has me thinking. It has me thinking a lot about it. And, a lot of these popular materials that came into vogue, like even in the 80s, like cologne,
Yes.
like cologne really starts to stick out like a sore thumb if you get like a vintage from like the 80s that wasn't preserved
Oh,
well.
Yeah, like I
It
think
just, and I think that's why people are like, oh, I'm not really sure if I like cologne on these older fragrances. Well, I
sure.
think there's something about it. It just sort of, the
Absolutely.
way that it sits in an aged fragrance, it just
Yeah, it doesn't mellow, it doesn't.
collapses everything that's more delicate and more
Mhm.
nuanced. And like if you get like an old bottle of cool water, like with
Oh,
the cologne and the hydromercenol, and people are like,
yeah.
oh, that, it's sad because not only is it hard to get like a vintage cool water that smells like, it's been well preserved, it's a well preserved bottle because it was
Mhm.
a really successful fragrance. There's so many bottles floating around that are not well preserved, but then also the reformulations, they kind of change as the whole spirit or character of it. So it's really hard to navigate. And I think that that's where this whole discourse about like, what formulations are superior, and but there's very little discussion of like what fragrances don't age as well as others. Like in
Mhm.
some of my reviews, I just did it on the review for Je Reviens. Je
Mhm.
Reviens, it took me a while before I could find one that didn't smell like it was turned. So
Mhm.
I like to mention that. Like, I'm not going to just sit here and say like this one, you know, that you're guaranteed when you get a vintage fragrance that it's going to smell pleasant, because sometimes it doesn't.
Exactly.
And there are just certain things like ionones are really tough to, like, ionones degrade in ways that they
Mhm.
lose their, I mean, for lack of a better word, not that it really exists in chemistry, but I describe it more poetically as elasticity.
Mhm.
So they kind of just feel more, things certain feel more brittle to the nose. So those things
Like a
happen,
really
and I
worn out pair of underwear, like they allow gone.
right, exactly. You lose that listed. It's like the olfactory equivalent of, it's just,
But also,
worse for the wear. Time
um,
has
we
been
also become different smellers. Like we're not static people, you know.
right.
I think about the woman who started this journal. She's the same, but she's not the same at the same time because she smelled so much more. And there
Yeah,
were things that I was like, whoa. And now looking back, I'm like, why did I ever think that fragrance was weird? And
yeah,
so, the more you're exposed to, the more you smell, the more you kind of like for example, my first fragrance, like my actual first fragrance, I was studying abroad in France. I had been living with a host family for the summer. I was 14 years old.
yeah.
And I loved my host family. I just absolutely adored them. And they had such an impact on, my love of the language and my continued poor career choices today. And so this family at the end of the summer, I remember my host mother said, we didn't really know what to get you for going away presents. So we're going to do what we would do if you were really our daughter and you were turning 15. So she took me to the perfume store and she let me pick out my first fragrance. And even though I have been surrounded by my grandmother and my mother, this was really my first opportunity to figure out what I liked.
Mm,
I remember thinking, wow, like in the United States, I would never, like, no sales assistant would ever be so helpful to a child, basically. But the patience that the sales assistant had, and just sort of the sort of importance of it. Wow, this is going to be your first fragrance. Like you never forget your first fragrance. We have to get it right. That kind of um, sort of honoring that moment. It made a real impact on me. What do you think I walked away with?
oh God, out of everything, I really just don't even, I don't know.
Yours Dune.
Dune.
I know it's like the aquatic with no water. It's like the waterless
Yeah,
aquatic fragrance.
yeah. I love that. I love
And
that.
and that kind of really fit me at the time. Like I was really thinking a lot about gender. I was really rebelling against because my mom, big white floral, she loves her girly things. I think one time I came home from college and my mom was like, "Don't pack anything. I bought clothes for you." And then I looked at my bed and everything was pink and had fake fur on it, and I'm like, "Oh man, like for real." So, but for me, I really love that kind of cool, sort of playing with masculine codes and in
Yeah.
fashion and also scent, and that stayed with me. And so if you go to my apartment, some of the things that make it exceptionally flammable is I'm on this eBay search for the Dune that I remember, because I came off of the plane after the summer in France and my mother was like, "What is that smell?" And then she promptly decided that this fragrance was way too adult for her teenager. She confiscated it. So sad. And then when I went back to the same host family the following year and I told them the story, they're like, "Oh, no, 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 no." She thought that was a big fragrance. So they sent me home with Angel, which my mother was,
No. Oh, wow.
but it, I love Angel. Angel was one of my absolute favorites. If you were to go into my collection, I have more flankers of like Angel than I have of anything else.
Love
And
it.
but the thing is that it took me a long time to grow into that fragrance. It wore me probably
Yeah.
until my 30s. And that's when I was like, all right, like I'm gonna make this fragrance my bitch. Like, there now. And so it's been sort of a constant love ever since. But it's kind of funny to think about these bottles of Dune that I keep buying off of eBay, searching for that scent that my mother confiscated from me. And all of them are just like a little bit off. Like the current formulation of it, it's not
It's
really
kind of like you
good.
have to find that sweet spot. This is what there's actually a review that's coming up, where I argue as a for finding that sweet spot and just hoping for the best as a vintage collector. And
Mhm.
some vintage collectors are like, "Oh, you must absolutely get the first formulation." But the first formulation was, I don't know, 50, 60 years ago. And it's like, what are the odds that you're going to find one that is going to be,
Mhm.
locked in Fort Knox with no light or heat or any other elements? Like, very
Constant
unlikely.
30 degrees, no humidity.
Right.
Yeah.
So
Or humidity control.
exactly. So there was I got the reviews coming up in Monday. It's like a sneak preview for those who are tuned in, but it's for the original Drakkar, not Drakkar Noir, but the original, for
Ah,
which Drakkar Noir was a
it's
flanker, because
there.
even back then, even though it was far less common, there were flankers.
I mean, it's
So it was the
obvious when you look at the title, right, for Car Noir, but people just kind of like miss it, you know. They're like, yeah.
and this is the original Drakkar from Guy Laroche from 1972, but not the original, because I was too afraid to go that far back. So I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll just get like an early 80s one, because there's a little bit more of a, I mean, this little bit more of a chance that it's going to smell closer to what it originally was if I find one that looks to have been kept in pretty good conditions.
Mhm.
And that is like my lesson for people who get into collecting vintages, that even though you might develop this fetish for like the oldest and most original, it,
Mhm.
it may be a risky situation. So try to find, do as much research as possible and find a version that is a little bit younger, but
Mhm.
maybe old enough that it is prior to serious reformulation. So if something was still being produced in the 80s until it was discontinued, go for
Mhm.
the 80s one. If something was still produced until the 90s, go
Mhm.
with the 90s one.
Yes.
Just because there is much more of a likelihood that A, it is going to be less degraded,
Mhm.
and B, you'll get that formulation that you
Mhm.
might be wanting.
Mhm.
So Dune is one where it's really tough because it has that high percentage of helianol. This is
Mhm.
the same reason why I didn't get vintage Diarella, because Diarella is
So,
also built around a high percentage of helianol, and helianol has a certain degradation process that renders it unrecognizable. So I see all these people like, you absolutely must get the Diarella from the 70s. And I'm like, are you sure now? Because
I
I
mean,
really,
yeah.
if you want to help me find a bottle from the 70s that still smells great,
Mhm.
go at it. Do me a huge favor. I'm going to go for the 90s version or the
Mhm.
early 2000s version before it really was really reformulated, because it's going to smell more like it's intended to smell than that version from the 70s that, I'm not going to keep on buying a bottle after a bottle and then returning it. And then,
Mhm.
you also sometimes like there are no returns, like
Mhm.
I'm not going to keep doing that until I happen to find a bottle from the 70s. Like I've been there, I've done that.
Mhm.
It's too much heartbreak and frustration. So that's my tip for people who are tuned in. And my suggestion for you with Dune, obviously you probably know all of this. Like you want to find a bottle that says Christian Dior. You want to find, you know,
You look at the
Uh,
sticker, you look at, yeah, like,
but try to like look at like I don't know Raiders of the Lost Scent and try to find like the formulation that came out like in the late 90s or early 2000s, where it's like not as old,
the person
but
who
then still even then like the bottle might have been sitting
shout
in
out to
somebody's
him.
dresser for like 20
Yeah.
years too, so it's tough, you know.
Yeah. So, this actually goes into my third lightning round question.
Oh,
So
nice, nice.
amazing. Because sometimes when I think about buying vintage, I just have to let go of the fact that, because, like, also, I have no realm of comparison. I wasn't alive in the 50s. So,
Right.
like, how am I supposed to smell it and go, oh, it smells like what it should? How am I supposed to know that? So you kind of look at these bottles themselves as like art objects, because it's true that the bottles themselves change.
They,
So my
yeah.
question to you, what do you consider to be the best smelling perfume in the worst looking bottle?
Oh, wow.
I have one. It's a great perfume in a very
Watch, I'm gonna love the bottle that you don't like.
it's a
Because
very
I love the bottles that people think are
very,
ugly.
very funny
I actually
bottle.
need to turn around because some of my collection is behind me to kind of get jostle my brain a little bit to
Yeah,
um that's such a good question too, because there's some where it's like I almost didn't even want to buy it because the bottle was so ugly. So there's one bottle from okay, there's one I can think of. There's probably multiples. We should actually we should revisit this and do maybe like a collaborative post on Substack or something because there's plenty of ugly ass bottles that have good perfume. But there's one from Claude, Montana, from the early 90s.
Oh, I think I know which one you're talking about.
It's not one of the cool ones either. It's
Oh,
like I'll get it.
okay.
Hold tight, entertain the audience for like I don't know 2 seconds because it's right
Mhm.
behind here.
Okay. So wait, can you still hear me as you're digging around back there? Maybe not. Uh-huh. Okay.
All right, see how fast it was for me to
Wow,
find that because
that
I
was
do.
quick.
Yeah, because it's in a bag because I was going to write about it. I've already done a review, but I was going to do another thing on Substack eventually.
Mhm.
So this is called Comore by Montana. Now, first of all, look at the box. I'm going to zoom in. You'll still be here.
Mhm.
Um, so
Wow.
I, I
That says duty free all over it.
duty free, like the kerning is kind of weird too. Like
Yes.
I don't really understand the repeat
No,
text
this
of
is
Montana
like
and
end of
this.
year sale. Like, yeah, it's giving.
Yeah, yeah. I need.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's pretty much the box. Yeah, Montana. Oh, we get it. Okay, right.
nice,
Montana. I'll try to move this light because the light is
nice.
kind of. Yeah, so that's the outside. So the box is hideous, right?
Mhm.
And
I
and the
feel like
bottle
the box came out of the dress barn. Oh my God, what is that?
the bottle's hideous too.
That
And I
is
hate that
hideous.
font. I really hate it with a passion.
Okay.
And not that I care about plastic, but this is like screaming plastic. Like
Wow.
it's like not plastic, but cheap plastic.
It's kind of a
It is
flip.
just
Wow.
such an ugly bottle.
This
So
ugly.
generic for Montana, which is known for like, like jus de peau and
I mean, it's
the parfum de peau, not jus de peau,
yeah,
parfum de peau, and like these iconic bottles that look like a genome and stuff
Mm,
like that, like monolithic bottles. And then in the 2000s, but the fragrance
it's not bad.
is
It's good.
something that Guerlain or Calon could have
Really?
released. It's
Oh,
really beautiful, like this
very cool.
beautiful aromatic,
Okay.
green aromatic masculine scent. Some people compare it a little bit to Coriolan from
Hmm.
Guerlain, which was like a huge flop in the 90s. It was like the
Hmm.
masculine fragrance that was released in the late 90s, and it was an abject failure. But it's not like it's not a dupe. That's a whole other story. Like I hate that conversation.
Hmm.
So it's not really a dupe, but it's similar. But I'll spray it like just to kind of once again jostle the mind and the memory. So beautiful, like there's just this beautiful herbaceous aromatic, this lavender that's really beautiful. It's just so like the
Wait, what?
bottle does it a disservice because you'd think this is like a rack store special,
Mm, mm, mm.
but it smells so nice. And
Yeah.
it's just, it gives me such cognitive dissonance
Yeah.
to know that this is, so that's one of them. I hope that's a good enough one.
Mine is Rocha Man, which is one of the best coffee fragrances. But the bottle looks like something you would call that EMT guy, like the guy
Yeah.
who like
Yeah. You got to have a little too much fun there.
yeah, the really famous guy who tells you about all the bacteria that's going to be partying in your gastric, your digestive system. Like if you
Yeah. Not,
put
not to kink
on it.
shame or anything, but no pun intended.
Exactly, exactly. It is an ugly bottle for a
Oh
great
God,
fragrance.
yeah, yeah, that one's pretty rough to, yeah, that's pretty much, that sums it up. It's an eyesore. It's, yeah, there's a few that are like that. We're going to redirect our attention quickly because this is my fault mostly, to redirect our attention to the chat.
Oh,
Um, we have a real backlog here, so I want to attend to some people. Jean Sent, I hope you're still here. I always love to have you here for the live streams. Her scent of the day is Mille de Bois by Serge Lutens. Tons of pollen and tree sap on me.
mm,
Very lovely. Darren Allen, we do love you here at Effluvium. Great to see you. And Ricardo says, from what you've smelled, is there any aroma chemical that you're anosmic to? I'm anosmic to pure ambroxan, even at 70%. And I could only smell ISO-E after dilution and only after spraying it. Yeah, because those are very large molecules, so they get like lodged in your olfactory receptors. So especially if you're smelling them neat, smelling them undiluted, that could really happen. It's really the magic with a lot of those is when they're diluted,
mm,
and then some things like that I only really discern once they're part of like a final formula. So
mhm.
there's a few that are like that. Can you think of any in particular, Daisy, that you feel like you tend to be anosmic to?
Any of those molecules that are huge that for some people their receptors are just not, like biologically they're just not going to be able to smell them. But I do think that, like you were saying, when it's in the formula, you can smell the effect that they have
Yeah,
on on other
it's this.
materials. Hmm.
It's the same here. Most musks I can kind of discern on their own, which is pretty impressive, I guess, because a lot of people are anosmic to musks, and that's why a lot of perfumes have a few different types of musks to account for that. But there are a few that I am anosmic to. There's actually one called Aldron, and
Mm.
Aldron, it doesn't smell like anything on its own, but like you said, when it's in a fragrance, and I've experimented with Aldron,
Hmm.
boy, does it really impart a presence in a composition in ways that shock me because I can't tell from the isolated material at all. But it's fascinating, fascinating stuff.
I remember the very, very, very first time I smelled Hebione. I didn't really know what I was smelling. It felt just sort of like an effect, and I just couldn't believe, that for something that was supposed to be used to create or recreate a jasmine, it just felt so transparent and sheer and difficult to grasp. So it took me a while to kind of be able to identify and be like, ah, okay, I know what that is.
Right. And then over time, I don't know if you experience this, but you just pick up the Hedion sillage. It's like,
That's
oh, Hedion. I just smell Hedion in the air.
mhm,
Somebody has a fragrance that has a ton of it in it. Yeah, yeah. It was the same experience for me. And then after a while of like working with it, then I
mhm,
started to smell it because my I started to adapt to it. But that could be a tough one at first, for
mhm.
sure. So there's more comments here. Misspelled tomato, loving the chat. JJ and Daisy might be a cardinal sin probably, but I prefer the reformulated. Egoist of the vintage one just feels cleaner and more streamlined.
So speaking of which, so like you, but I mean your collection dwarfs mine for sure. But
Most
I
people,
do
it's insane. It's
so
really bad.
so but it's my collection's big enough that it's very, very rare that I drain an entire bottle, and I
Yeah.
kicked my bottle of Egoist after like years and years and years. So I bought a new bottle of Egoist, and I was very pleased to see that it still looks the same. It's still an eau de toilette, and but when I smelled it, I was like, was I just used to my syrupy old Egoist that I forgot
Yeah.
like what fresh out of the can like Egoist is like?
And
But
it was just such a breath of fresh air. Like, oh, it's so, you have all those top notes and
yeah, like I mean, I always thought of egoist as being super balsamic, but then
yeah,
here I was like, huh, no, kind of. I don't know, but it's been one of the fragrances on heavy rotation this spring.
marvelous. I have a version from 1997. This is an example of where I
I think mine
sampled.
was from the 90s. I bought it off of eBay and it was pretty syrupy.
This one was actually doing. I can do another show and tell if you'd like. You should see how, like, I've gotten really good just because, hell, like, I'm kind of a nut. Like, I'm learning how to, like, find vintages that are in good condition. But you
Mhm.
should see the one from '97. It looks like it's brand new. Hold on 1 second.
Really?
Entertain the crowd for like 1 second, because I once again it will be like literally grabbing it right here.
No problem, no problem. But yeah, so it is true that the egoist that I just bought that I'm actually wearing today, it does feel clearer and more streamlined. But Chanel, I think overall does a really good job at keeping the spirit. Of course, none of these brands are ever going to cop to any kind of reformulation, but I think that Chanel has consistently done a great job maintaining the spirit of a fragrance and then making sure that they
Absolutely.
satisfy those customers who have worn it and who consider those fragrances to be part of their identity. Like I think about my grandmother. She was such a loyal Chanel No. 5 wearer that she probably could very easily have identified changes in the fragrance, from one bottle to the next. But I don't think she ever felt like she was getting something completely different.
So
I
here's the
love it. I
box.
still love I love the packaging. I love the bottle. I love the how it's all squared off, like very masculine kind of shoulders. And the thing that just the cherry on top is the Egoist commercial when you have all of those women screaming out the window. Iconic,
Yes, the shutters.
iconic. Wow,
No,
that looks like an amazing condition. Look at that. That looks exactly like the one I just bought.
right.
Incredible.
And this is from '97. So the box shows.
Did you buy that from a vampire? Was that person living underground?
Oh, you should see the Von Ver that I have
No.
from the '60s. It's
Wow.
green, like it didn't
Oh,
turn.
amazing.
And this smells exactly like the late '90s version, because even the late '90s version was sort of different from the early '90s version, and it was the version that I remembered because I had a small bottle in the late '90s.
Mhm.
Lovely, lovely stuff. Yeah, hold on a second. I I have the there's no like exact organization besides I just know where everything's sitting.
Oh,
It's just so weird how I'm like I can pinpoint.
mhm.
It's kind of crazy, but I'll show
That's
you the
just
Von
the
Ver.
color. Mm. So anyway, misspelled tomato. I hope that you're enjoying your bottle of Igloos. I think it's a great fragrance for the spring, obviously, because I'm wearing it right now.
So it comes from experience, like because I'm a more of an experienced vintage collector. So it's like a lot of trial and error, a lot of like bargaining and, finding the right dealers and sellers, finding people who I can trust, and
Mhm.
just taking risks. You have to be a risk taker when you buy vintages. So this
Wow,
bottle, I mean
look
the
at
box rather, it looks,
that.
save for like a little tiny blemished hair here, looks like it was just right off of
I know.
the shelf.
I can't believe I can't believe that box looks pristine. That that
And
that's like a Star Wars character still in the plastic. Whoa, look at that.
it is still tinted green. Do you
That
know
that is like
this
the Gap grass fragrance color. That's amazing.
Gap Grass? Totally. I had
Yeah.
that too in the '90s.
Weirdly, it does look like the new bottle for Gap grass, but yeah.
Oh,
Mhm.
but do you know that green in perfume is really hard to retain?
Oh yeah.
So this must have been out. I keep it out of the light too. I would never put this like on a shelf.
Mhm.
I keep it stored away.
Hmm.
But yeah, this had never seen the light of day probably, and it was
Incredible.
discovered, and now it's in my
Incredible.
possession.
Amazing.
So it is true that like you can get vintages where it depends on how old.
Hmm.
Um, each decade that you go back, I feel like it changes somewhat. Like the 60s, you can still get fragrances that smell about 95% the way they had smelled, as long as you get a pristine specimen. But each decade that goes back, that reduces. It reduces decade after day. And I'm talking about pristine. And pristine is hard to find on its own because a lot of the time they're not pristine. They're not. And I've been through that. And yeah, it's sad. Sometimes like they won't even smell. Have you ever gotten a vintage where did the
Yeah,
smell go?
I just sort of think to myself, I'm just bottle collecting, like the actual bottle, you
Yeah,
know,
yeah. For some things like I have it more for the
aesthetic.
the historical artifact because some of my vintages probably only smell about like 50 to 60% how they should, and the other half or so is the degradation, really. Yeah.
Mm. So we're
So,
looking here at Ricardo. Mm.
Blue Infini is surprisingly an amazing oak moss by Biche for Bama.
I love Canton Biche. I love his work. Big fan. I haven't smelled these new Balmain. Have you?
The new Belma, no, and I've heard very mixed reviews on them. Some people who don't know, like, of course, here we go again, who don't know the previous versions. They don't have anything to really compare them against. Some of them think they smell great. Other people who I think were expecting, an Ivoire or an Eben,
I think you just have to take them as completely different fragrances.
they're not the same fragrances, so you can't go into it expecting them to be. They're just completely different compositions. They just happen to have the same names as the
Hmm.
heritage releases from Belmont. Um,
Dior is the worst about this. They're the
oh,
worst.
absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely, yeah.
Mm.
And even to desecrate the Miss Dior name, as they
Oh,
say, it's like,
it's,
oh well, that's business for you. It's a
it's
new generations. Like, yeah, it's. I'm not really for somebody who's like kind of like a vintage nerd. I'm not a vintage snob, and I don't have this belief that like I don't have this expectation for the marketplace today to basically reproduce
Mhm.
exactly the fragrance as it was, because they know the marketplace is completely different and it's not going to be commercially viable.
Mhm.
So and I really respect smaller brands who want to retain their heritage. That's wonderful. Like Guerlain does that. But they do it they do it at the expense of maybe losing money, but it's respectful.
I mean, you're never gonna make it everyone happy. There's always going to be someone complaining about something.
S. Shinoda.
Mhm.
I bought a vintage Venezia and was disappointed to see it smelled like paint thinner out of the bottle. But when I put it on skin after about 30 seconds, it was gorgeous. How do you explain that? Top notes. It's top
Yeah,
notes all the way.
and but it's a little bit. I think of it also a little bit like wine, like how if you have a really old wine, you probably want to decant it and let it kind of air out a little bit. Mhm.
Yeah,
It's still there, but your first impressions are probably not going to be the same.
right, right. The top notes are going to be the ones that really deteriorate faster than everything else, and that's why citrus aromatics, the vintage citrus aromatics I have, um, those are the prime examples of where I would buy a bottle and I'm like, oh, that one's turned, gotta return it, or I gotta eat up the money because I just wasted my money, and then I'll buy another one. Oh, that one, and there's like for example, Toffee Lancôme, which is iconic from the 80s. I bought two bottles before I found a third bottle that was preserved. It was actually preserved. And also another crazy thing is that you can't always tell just from the color. Like
No.
sometimes fragrances go dark,
Mhm.
they get darker, but it doesn't even mean that they were stored improperly. It just means that there was a high vanillin content. So they still smell great. It's
Mhm.
just the vanillin just darkens. And that can happen over like a few years, actually.
Or something was really indolic.
Indoles do that too, like this sort of like reddish brown kind of thing that goes on. Totally. Like indoline is a type of shift space. And if that shift space is used in certain fragrances, it will turn like this maroonish color. It's really interesting. UK, hi. Glad to have you here. We have 15 people who are tuned in. Why don't
Great.
I why don't I ask you a question, but it's going to be a question that I'll have to think of on the fly.
Okay. I can regale you with the perfume bottle that I absolutely think is hysterical,
Oh,
but I would
oh,
want to own the entire set, but I don't want to smell a single one of them.
do you want me to ask you the question and then you do that, or have you do that and then ask the question?
Do you want to hear what the fragrance is first, or do you want to wait?
To hell with the question. We'll get back to that later. I want to hear from you.
I want on my mantle an entire series of Nicki Minaj perfume heads.
Ah,
I do not want to smell a single one of them. I want them all lined up because they are hilarious.
they're so over the top. I
Mhm.
love it. They're so ugly that they kind of go full circle to being beautiful in their ugliness. Do you know Bangkok Hound?
Oh,
He's on Instagram. His icon is one of those bottles.
that's hilarious. But I mean, I feel like you can't just have one. Like you have to have like all of them to
The
really
whole
you have to
I
have the whole collection.
I am sure there's somebody
If
out
I
there who
if
was
I
a
have
completist.
if I had money to burn and if I had someone to dust them for me, I would get all the Nicki Minaj heads. I don't want to smell them. I just want to have them.
Yeah, no need to smell them. They're
Mhm.
just to look at. Love it. All
To
right.
scare children, small animals. Mhm.
So, okay, I'll get back to the question now that I didn't even like think of yet. um, is there a smell from nature that you absolutely despise?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, maybe not nature, but there is
You can
definitely a smell that I absolutely I mean, it depends how you define nature, but there is a smell that I absolutely despise.
let's start with one that is organic, that it comes from a living thing. It just gives off a smell.
Again, it depends what you mean by living thing, but
It
I
can be anything. It could be like
I
yeast, algae, anything that's like alive.
the smell of mildewy towels,
Yes, I hate
it
this.
like I like it bothers me so much. And what especially bothers me is like let's say you visit a friend and they don't smell it. They can't smell it.
Yeah.
That I just blows my mind.
Yeah. And that's probably because they're just continuing to use their mildewy towel without washing it regularly and they don't notice the smell,
Ugh,
which is
it's horrible. Or
really
the
gross.
or I think what actually, and this is even slightly more disgusting, they're so accustomed to that mix of mildewy towel and a very, very heavily perfumed detergent that that in their mind smells clean.
Imagine if there was a perfume that smelled like that.
I'm sure that there has been, I'm sure I have smelled perfumes that smell like mildewy towels. In fact, I'm absolutely positive that in my whole, like, time of sniffing in the past, I don't know, 10 years, I probably said more than once, this smells like a mildewy towel.
I love it.
Mhm. It's just that it's one of those things where I don't want to retain this information, so it just, leaves.
All right. Well, yeah, mildew is a living thing, as a matter of fact. So that does.
Yeah.
um,
Worst perfume to wear to a job interview. Worst.
for this is my okay for me to answer. Marc Antoine Barrois Ganymede.
Really?
Yeah,
I would have said Tilia because it's so loud.
I haven't smelled it. Maybe I would change my answer once I smell that one.
Mhm.
I I think that it is just too bombastic to be appropriate for a job interview or for going out for a meal or pretty much any formal occasion. I think that even a couple sprays is too much for me, and I'm completely biased. I just find it to be a really um,
I like it.
assault level.
I like
I
it.
as I itch my nose just thinking about it. Yeah, yeah, I have a tough time with it.
Mm.
Quentin Biche. Sorry. But I do like some of his work. I love his Marseille for Comme des
Mm.
Garçons.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Mandarin of Corsica, such an interesting twist on a salty, gourmand, citrus, candied fruits. Really interesting. And of course, like Angel Muse.
Are you familiar with the Bijan Man bottle?
I am.
Yeah, the
I haven't had
donut.
John in a while. Yeah, the donut. You know what
Yeah.
I just picked up? Although, like, I'm a little bit terrified because I have this fear that I'm gonna break in, and my apartment's gonna smell like it forever. Like the Boucheron, like the Jaipur, like the bracelet.
All right. Yep.
So I just bought I bought that like vintage, and so you can actually wear it like a bracelet, but I'm just like terrified too.
Yeah, I'd be kind of scared to do that as well.
Yeah,
Some of
yeah.
these things are really fragile.
I mean,
Oh
also
God.
it's a splash, so it's
Oh
like
well.
you can't smell it without like getting it everywhere.
Right.
Mhm.
Emily says the absolute worst smell in the world is vinegar.
Mm.
So I can share a gross detail about myself. I'm sure that somebody is going to take this out of context and like lampoon me for it. But I can't really eat a lot of garlic because I end up smelling like a huge vat of chopped garlic. I can't.
Interesting.
So I
That's so
can't eat garlic
interesting.
anymore.
Uh-huh.
So
I mean,
there's your fun fact.
like, I
I
mean, I,
avoid garlic now.
I mean, I grew up with a lot of garlic in my food, so actually, I just don't even know. I think that my people were relatively scentless people, so.
I was relatively scentless when after eating food myself. I don't know
Mhm.
if it's some metabolic changes I've gotten older. However, it depends on, how the garlic is added to the food. If it's whole cloves, not an
Sure,
issue.
sure.
We know how where this goes. Like if it's minced, forget about it. I can't have things that are heavy in minced garlic because yeah, it's powerful. It's so I don't know why I decided to share this.
Interesting. That's
That
good.
that's going to be my claim to fame now. Nobody's going to ever really think about the fact that I write about fragrance. They're going to think about how if I eat garlic, I'm going to
No, no, no.
smell.
Like I'm sure that there are a lot of people. There are a lot of people with, food agrees and or disagrees differently for everyone. Mm.
Try civet paste for a job interview, says Ricardo.
Oh.
Try civet paste.
Mm. Yeah.
Oh boy.
Mhm.
UK says I love the vinegar smell. So there you go. See, vinegar for me, it doesn't really elicit like a negative reaction or a positive one. To me, it's just like that is the smell of vinegar.
I mean, for the longest time, vinegar was used for cleaning purposes. It was used, I
Yeah.
mean, it still is. Like you think about how many people add vinegar to a wash cycle for towels and things like that. But also, like vinegars, I mean, like I think it's great that Diptyque still sells vinegar. You
Oh,
know,
I do have the vinaigre toilette.
it's
Uh,
great. Good
yeah,
for
yeah.
them. It's such this little thread that ties them still to like the 19th century, the 18th century. Like good for them that they still have that in their lineup of products.
Emily says I love the smell of garlic. I love the smell of garlic and the taste of it, but I don't think that I guess I have to I'm not it's not like it's like I smell like food garlic though, because it's
Mhm.
like garlic that has been processed through my body and
Mhm.
coming out of my pores. It's not that kind of yeah. So, it's not pleasant. And it's like I just I avoid it. Thankfully, not all alliums are an issue for me. It's really the garlic.
So for me, like when I got to the end of my degree and I had to defend my dissertation, I really agonized about the fragrance I wanted to wear to my defense. And I went back and forth. I dug through all of my samples, and I ended up with Frederic Mall's Une fleur de cassis,
Mm,
uh, huge powder, bomb.
I absolutely love it, but it's
And
an acquired taste.
yes, not only is it a gigantic powder bomb, but it's as if you took that giant powder bomb and you threw it on top of a pile of wet cardboard. It is not for everyone. I'm pretty sure that my committee passed me because they couldn't wait for me to leave the room. Pretty sure.
I adore it, and you know what? You know for certain, like Cassie Absolute is in it. Like there's a big percentage of Cassie Absolute in it because I have the raw material, and it's like
I
this
don't
is
even
predominantly Cassie.
I don't think they make it anymore. It's not part of the lineup anymore, is it?
Did they discontinue it?
Oh, I mean, I don't hear anyone talking about it. Everyone talks about Portrait of a Lady, and then they have the new red bottle that's out. It's
I
a great.
think most of those are kind of snoozy. Like I'm not like even Mosque Ravageur. It's like, I like all the misfits of Frederick Mall.
So, my Frederick Mall, because at the time, because like, I'm old, we're old. I remember
Yeah.
it was the mall that I could afford, and this was the Sophia Grosjean outrageous. Yeah,
Outrageous. I
so
remember when
this
that came out.
and remember, like, it was outrageous with an exclamation point. It was really cheeky. I
Yeah.
remember that you had to go to Barney's to buy. They pretty much chained it to the register so people wouldn't steal it.
Yeah.
And it was the cheapest mall. It had like a silver cap. It had a Barney's label, and I remember it smelled like you had thrown a mojito into a New York City laundromat dryer. It was fantastic, and
It's so weird. I love it.
I went through so many bottles of that, and then I saw that they have a couple of years ago, they have brought it back, but it doesn't have the exclamation point anymore, and I just can't bring
They
myself
toned it down.
well, I can't bring myself to smell it. It was such, like, an iconic fragrance for me at a certain time in my life, and I don't wanna smell it and be like and to have that olfactory memory change, I just
Right.
wanna, like, bottle it up and keep it in its sort of pristine form in my memory, and I don't really wanna smell the new version.
Yeah. And when I know of a new version, I get a little scared. I don't want to. I don't want either my memory of the fragrance to be distorted, or I just don't want to feel like this certain like existential dread of knowing that like something is just not going to be produced ever again. I already deal with that kind of a lot as it is.
Mhm.
Um, but to think of Un Fleur de Cassis being discontinued is kind of sad,
Mm,
because that's long been one of my favorites just because it is just so out of this world, quite unlike anything else. I remember when I was doing perfume making and I got Cassis
mhm,
Absolute, and I was like, oh, so there really is Cassie in Un Fleur de Cassis, because I recognized it right away. And a lot of this is the one thing that I always have to correct people, and I try to do it in a gentle, not nerdy, actually kind of way. But Cassie is a different acacia tree to mimosa, so I
mhm,
try to explain to people that is like that's it's not synonymous with mimosa. The two have very different temperaments as far as like a scent profile. Um, and I find Cassie do have that wet cardboard, but also that kind of slightly dirty underthing kind of
mm.
background to it. That's kind of interesting. Whereas Mimosa is just so Pollyanna in comparison. It is just so sunny and innocent. It's
Mhm.
like Cassie is like the sort of like the bad boy or bad girl to
The raunchy
Mimosa.
cousin, the raunchy
Yes, exactly.
I mean, powder is really polarizing. I think that if I had to pick one note that people either like or are repelled by, I think that there are very few people who are neutral about powder. Either it immediately gives you grandma vibes, and also speaking of grandma vibes, I hate this kind of categorization of certain perfumes as smelling like your grandmother, because your grandmother was probably some really fine vixen back in the day.
Yeah.
And I can't even imagine what's going to happen in 20 years or so, or 20, or maybe even less, when you have all of these women who wore Santal 33 in their 20s. And all of a sudden they're like, Gen Alpha, Gen Beta grandchildren are be like, ew, gross.
Right, right. No, no. Yeah, the whole old lady, old man, grandpa, grandma trope. I've given up on even trying to like educate people on how that can come off as sort of ageist and closed-minded, because people are just gonna think what they're gonna think, and it's just like, and I get it. It's like generational differences. If something reminds you of like an older family member, what I think is kind of crazy is that I think that some younger people are getting into vintages because they were too young to even remember smelling them on older people. So to them, it's like there isn't that same association with old people.
I think I
Yeah.
think another thing going along with that is the search for authenticity. And this sort of harkening back to a time when things were slower. Like one thing that I have also noticed about my students, I I maybe misguidedly thought that all of my students were pro AI, pro using all. Yes, they do use them, but the number of my students who are very much against that or are talking more about getting rid of their apps or really trying to focus, number of my students who talk about how they can even see a difference between how much they were able to concentrate in middle school versus now.
Wow. Yeah.
I kind of see that nostalgia for this kind of fantasy past. But I mean, people are always nostalgic for the past, I think.
And for even a past for which they had not lived.
Hmm.
It's
Yeah.
interesting to see the interpretation of the 80s. For us, we
Mhm.
lived in the 80s, and then the interpretation of the 80s for people who weren't even alive for another
I mean, let's be
10,
honest,
15 more years. Yeah.
we were really young in the 80s. Like
We were pretty young.
we
Yeah.
were
I
really
was single digit aged for most of the decade. I
yeah,
turned 10 in 88.
we
So,
were really young in the 80s.
yeah.
Mhm.
But I still have like a lot of memories of it. 70s though, 70s, I wasn't really around very long for the 70s, but I think at least like you have some of the cultural hangover and residual culture of the 70s that went into the 80s. But definitely, decades long before that, it's like I feel that different kind of nostalgia where it's like I know what it wasn't really like, but I can only sort of like approximate it or just hear tales from people who lived through it.
Mhm.
And then there's a lot of the fragrances where I sort of paint a picture in my head. I try to illustrate in my mind what context that fragrance was in, like especially these fragrances that were around during the 20s and 30s. And
Yeah.
yeah,
You
yeah.
think about, I mean, you think about fragrances like Habanita,
Yes.
and then you think about Chanel Number 5 as being pretty much a reaction against fragrances like Habanita, so a different version of femininity that still has the flap or drop waist and still has these sort of different ways of playing with code. The little black dress is super transgressive and because it references widows and the church and domestic help. And yeah, there's a lot to unpack.
Yeah, there's so much, people. We have right now on the live stream 24 likes. I was hoping before we sign up 25. That's been revised. We have 25. Let's aim for 30 before we sign off here. Let's try to get just a few more. We're going to sign off in a little bit. We
I
usually
can't
run.
believe like these 2 hours just like flew by.
Well, it can happen when you feel comfortable enough talking to another person. It's when it feels effortless, when it feels like a conversation, that happens, and it's like, wow, where did the time go? But we'll
Mhm.
stay on for just a little while longer. I usually don't stretch it too much longer than 2 hours. But we'll just give an opportunity for some folks to ask any other questions.
Hmm.
Please check out the description, because we have a couple links for you. I actually will go over what is in the description here. If you want to learn more about Daisy and her selection of perfume writing, there is a link in the description, and that is olalanyc.com. I also have a link to Fragrance Alliance Network there. You can check out.
So this is a new initiative that was launched less than a year ago in New York. And I was very, very honored that the founder of the Fragrance Alliance Network, it's an independent ISIPCA trained perfumer named Gus Romero. He reached out to me. He was put in touch with me via mutual friends, and he asked whether or not I would be willing to take some of the courses that I currently teach for my universities and make it into something that would be for a different public. Like my students are tortured by their final projects and final homework, like exams and things like that, but this would be something a little bit more laid back, but Gus wanted a very academic bent to it. And I have been longing, waiting for a forum like this for a long time. Nothing against brands who do these kinds of things, but I've always been very disappointed by the term master class because it's not really a master class. It's just another opportunity for a brand to introduce itself to you and then sell more fragrances. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like we want them to sell a lot of fragrances because it's always sad when a fragrance brand goes under, or they no longer they no longer keep producing new launches. So that's always sad. So we want to encourage people to support these small producers and these smaller lines. But at the same time, sometimes when I hear some of these master classes and they're using history to kind of spin this mythology,
Mm,
a little difficult from my standpoint as like as someone who really loves history, loves teaching history. It's really kind of hard for me to think about those master classes as being like opportunities to really learn about perfume history and society. So with my students, we talk about all kinds of different things. So I just wrapped up my perfume history and culture class here at the new school where I am right now.
mm,
And this semester, the class is on rotation. So we don't run it every single year because there are other classes that have to run as well. But this was the semester that the perfume history and culture class ran again. And my students talk about all kinds of things. They talk about gender, constructions of individual identity, social identity. They talk about subjectivity in terms of hygiene. And they also talk about violence, creation, metaphors for making perfume, being analogous to, like, if you think about the book. I mean, I'm not tired of talking about the book, but it seems like everyone only talks about this book. But
mm,
Perfume, the Story of a Murderer.
mm,
Yes,
mm,
of
mm,
course. When you pick these flowers, yes, it's a metaphor for destroying something beautiful and young and then transforming it into something else. I get it. But it's really a fun course, and it was nice to be able to have the opportunity through the Fragrance Alliance Network to start exploring other things with people who are not necessarily my students, because you get different perspectives and you get people who are bringing their own stories to these courses.
mm, mm.
Actually, we started out with some history courses, but it's the perfume and society classes that we've been really investing. I've been investing a lot in. So we've done fragrance and femininity, fragrance and
Mm.
masculinity. We've done, colonialism, colonial bodies. We've also done uh, food and fragrance.
Yes.
Coming up in June, I'm doing a class on the 90s. So it's really great to be able to talk a little bit about the 90s here
Yeah.
with you. The 90s were such an interesting decade, and it pretty much, from my perspective, laid the groundwork for the fragrances that we kind of know today. You know, we think about the beginning of the 90s when you had this rollover of the supermodels like Linda Evangelista, who's not waking up and, you know, getting out of bed for less than thousands of dollars.
Yes.
But then after that bombast, you get grunge, and then you get these super pared down fragrances like CK1, which
Right.
was unisex and really woody. And will we even have the Le Labo and then the Juliet Has a Gun, not a perfume? Will we even have these fragrances if not for CK1? And then you
Yeah.
also
Yeah.
get Angel, which launches during this time. You know, so you've got the gourmand, like the family that dominates the market today. So I think it's going to be a really great class.
Yeah. It sounds like it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I wish you were in New York. Come down.
I
Don't feel
should.
like
I really should. I don't get out of this area often enough, and now I have
take
yet
a
another
train right
reason to.
away.
What's that?
Just a train right away.
I know it is. It is. I'm really not that far up here in New England, so I really ought to. I ought to do that.
And then so that's in June, early June. And then mid-June, I'm doing a fragrant exploration of the television series Severance.
Hmm.
I think that is going to be super interesting because have you seen the series yet? Am I going to spoil it for you?
I I have not, so I don't know
Oh,
if I've been looking for a new series to
yeah,
watch too.
I would
So,
totally watch it. It's great. It's two
uh,
seasons. Seasons are relatively short and manageable. That's great.
all right, that's going to be the next season I watch. The last one I finished watching was Love on the Spectrum. It
Oh,
was great. I love it. I'm not laughing like mockingly, but laughing just because it's cute. Like it was really good. It was really good. I haven't really been watching too much TV. I've been trying to like dedicate as much time to catching up on my reading, but I do want to latch onto a new TV show with my partner and sink our teeth
what
into something
what
different. So
what
Severance.
what have you been reading?
Oh, what have I been reading? I was thinking of actually doing a post on Instagram about the newer book that I'm reading. It is by Oliver Berkman. It's called 4,000 Weeks Time Management for Mortals.
Uh-huh.
And this appealed to me because I feel like I'm constantly trying to organize my life and manage my time to make the most out of experiences. And I find that the paradox with that is that in doing that, I'm just leaving more room for other things that need to get done.
Mhm.
And that's kind of covered in this book. Also, I'm somebody who is constantly wanting to reach a point where everything is done and taken care of.
Mhm.
And this book is helping me understand that there is never an end point and that you have to just embrace the reality that there are going to be things that you will never experience in your lifetime, and that is okay. And
Mhm.
to just manage things in your life to allow you to have the most fulfilling experiences that you can. It's just been a great read so far. So it is recommended to everyone. 4,000 Weeks Time Management for Mortals. So that's what I started reading. Um, yeah. So I want to get into reading fiction again, but
Mhm.
reading classics because I
Mhm.
feel like classics, for me personally, not for everyone, but for me, they stimulate certain creative parts of my brain because it forces me to fill in the blanks and create in my own mind what I'm reading in a novel.
Mhm.
So that I feel like those parts of the brain have not been stimulated for a long time. So I want to start doing that as well.
Mhm.
Read something like Middlemarch. Like not even I'm talking about like stuff that will really challenge me, but in a good way. Not like, oh, I'm forcing myself to get through this book, but like the enjoyment of that because I used to get lost in that. And
Yeah,
yeah.
same. It's just I feel like those kinds of books, they're really with modern life, it's really hard to kind of stop, start, stop, start, stop, start, especially when you have these really complex narratives. Like for me, especially during the academic year, the school year, it's really hard for me to find that chunk of time. And I really admire people like my colleagues who are able to do it. Bravo. But I find like I'm constantly getting sidetracked by something that needs to get done or an email that needs to get answered. And then by
Hmm.
the time I come back to that classic book, I'm just like, wait, what happened? Like,
Right. You have to, yeah, yeah. It can, like sometimes I'll have to go back to through the previous pages and refresh. It will be such a stretch of time from when I last was reading it. Yeah.
mhm.
And I don't recall this always being the case, but now I have to have a very controlled environment to concentrate on reading.
I think
Never,
everyone is like that now. I
it's
think
like,
everyone has,
yeah, like
re-
I have to be away from devices. I have to have, I can listen to music as long as it's not lyric, it's not songs, but I like having some quiet music or it to be very quiet and to have that concentration.
mhm,
So I'm really impressed with people who can sit in a Starbucks and read a book or
mhm.
like a busy restaurant or something like what? I just couldn't do that. Yeah. So it needs to. So when you factor all of those things, it can be tough to find the right time to read. But I manage. I manage.
Shall we end with one more question from the lightning round list?
I think so. Do you
Yeah.
want? Okay.
So I've got
Yes.
two of them here.
Yes. You
So
can. You can ask me both.
the first one is best cheap thrill. And I'm not a big fan of the word cheap, but I mean, what else are you going to use? Best cheap thrill perfume in your collection.
Best cheap thrill
Yeah.
perfume. Cheap thrill. Well, I do like a lot of budget fragrances, drugstore classic fragrances. I'll name something that isn't actually an older release.
Okay.
It's Zum Mist. Zum Mist. ZUM space MIST. It's actually a line of different
What is
sort
it?
of aromatherapeutic mists. I'll
Uh-huh.
get it. I'll get it. I
Are
know
they
where
good?
that is too. I'll go get it. I'll show you. So I will call this a cheap thrill because it is in a plastic.
Nice.
It's in a plastic bottle, and it is this particular one from Zum Mist is frankincense and myrrh,
Uh-huh.
and it's an aromatherapy room and body mist.
Not bad.
And you could pick this up. I got this at Wegmans. I think it also is sold at Whole Foods, maybe, you know where to find this stuff in supermarkets and grocery stores. So this may be my cheap thrill because it smells like it could be a really expensive fragrance, but it is pretty much just a proprietary mix of essential oils and maybe some other ingredients. It does say fragrance, which doesn't matter to me. Some people may not realize that can mean synthetic, but it smells so good. Um,
I think mine is
yeah.
Adam Levine Her.
Okay, tell me about that
Have
one.
you
I think
seen
I've heard this is actually a pretty good one.
so like you can get it for about $11. The bottle is super heavy. It could probably double as a weapon if zombies came and you needed to grab something quickly to defend yourself. It's shaped like an old-timey microphone. And it was
Oh yeah.
initially introduced to me by Portia Turbo, who is part of Australian perfume junkies from back in the day. And so, Portia recommended it, and Portia mentioned that it was cheap as chips. It is cheap as chips. I think that my bottle was $11, and it smells super vintagey. Like if you are a fan of Rocha Femme and you want something along the same lines, yeah, I mean, how can you go wrong with that
No
price?
kidding.
Yeah.
Really?
It's a bit ridiculous, because Adam Levine's face is on it. So, like,
That
on
is, yeah, that's the ridiculous part, but
yeah, yeah, but at least it's not I mean, the bottle is kind of ridiculous too. I can't say that I wear it very often, but I do like to kind of, yank it out of my collection and be like, "Can you believe this stuff?" And then the other I don't necessarily consider it a cheap thrill because it smells so expensive for what it is. It is the Zara fragrance done by Joe Malone. It is the Leather Jardin.
Oh, Jardin. Yeah, yes,
That's
I've heard
super,
great things about that
super
one. Yeah.
green, super vintagey, but doesn't smell too retro. Terrific. And they keep re-releasing it in like a new bottle. They're good.
I noticed that it's an entirely different looking bottle now.
But
Yeah.
same fragrance.
Same fragrance. Good
Yeah,
to know. Good
yeah.
to know. All right.
Mhm. So my other question is, what is the most pretentious thing that you've ever said about perfume and you stand by it?
I mean, some people would argue that I say a ton of pretentious things, even though I try not to do it deliberately. Uh, God. Ooh, okay. All right. All right. Let me think about if I should even say this. This is a good
I
one.
have nothing against you. There's no judgment
Oh,
zone.
but there's going to be plenty of judgment with the fragrance community has a lot of either judgy people themselves or people who get bent out of shape over opinions. Um,
Mm.
so I do. I think you already know this from our conversations, but I have a bone to pick with modern ideas of what is niche. And I think that the great majority of fragrances that self consciously refer to themselves as niche um, are just overpriced versions of more midline department store fragrances.
I mean, what's so pretentious about that? That sounds like a
Then
pretty
it's not
fair
the well, it could be depending upon who you're around. I mean, who your company. I mean, my audience. I even hate calling it audience because it sounds so loaded. Like, but my people who watch my YouTube channel probably would agree, most of them. But I think in the larger, like in the larger community of fragrance enthusiasts, that might kind of ask like, well, what ones do you mean? And
I mean,
like,
so I have a very flexible definition of niche, probably more flexible than most people would,
yeah,
um, you know, recognize. So when I think about a niche fragrance, I actually think about personal identity and the way that you express your personal identity.
yeah,
And just like you gravitate towards certain clothing and you have your own personal style, what you wear in terms of fragrance is an extension of that, right? It's just not a visual extension of it, it's an olfactory extension of it. And I feel that fragrances that are not niche are usually fragrances that are designed to be pleasing to the largest public that you can get. So these are fragrances that are meant to be, just crowd pleasers. Niche, I think, are more fragrances that are like they're quirkier and you're not really looking to appeal to a wide public, but maybe you're looking for that one consumer who is like, okay, this is my story. Of course, that being said, every single small brand wants to sell out and have something be a huge hit. I don't deny that. And people who it's tough, right? Because we want these brands to succeed and we want these lines to not go under because this is an extremely competitive and expensive business to be in. But I always am a little bit unsure when people get really bent out of shape about brands that get bigger or maybe make moves to grow their customer base because they want to survive. Uh they they are not doing this. I mean, I don't know, it's or maybe it's because I lived through the 90s, so I have a very different idea when someone says selling out, you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
Mm.
No, me too. Me too. I think that the terminology has shifted from maybe when we were starting to discover what would be called niche 15, 16, 17 years ago. So now what I'm finding is that fragrance enthusiasts are referring to luxury brands as niche because they just so happen to not be associated with a designer label, which to me, I don't really understand those definitions. Like
Mm,
the younger faction, maybe not even younger, but people who are newer to the hobby or they're newly interested in fragrance, they seem to think that anything that niche, that is anything that is niche is just something that is not a designer fragrance, which that doesn't make sense to me because designer brands can have niche fragrances. So it's
absolutely.
there's no Venn diagrams being drawn. It's like very black and white. Like, is it a designer fragrance or is it a niche
I
fragrance
mean,
or
but
is it
also there's like the imperfection of the terminology. Are people conflating niche with indie? And like, what do you consider to be indie?
right? Because it could be an indie brand that wants to be crowd pleasing and they want to really make some money off of their own indie brand. They're, they want things that are going to appeal to like a wider market. So they're
Mhm.
not necessarily niche. That's
Sometimes,
where there's like these overlaps. Like the some things like that's why I think of a diagram where it's like there's no clear delineation. Like it's like designer's pretty obvious, but within designer brands can have like an exclusive line, but the exclusive line caters to a niche market, but maybe that niche market is not only looking for a fragrance that has maybe more of a nod to classical perfumery, but it's for somebody who has a thicker pocketbook as well. So it's
maybe
yeah,
maybe the term niche, I don't know, like do we really need it anymore because we can't talk about exclusivity? Because
yeah.
that's
It's all
that I think is what people are really looking for, something exclusive, something that
yeah,
not everyone has.
yeah.
Mm,
Yeah, I mean, there could be a matter of concept creep where it's like it's become so diluted as a term that do we really use that anymore?
mhm,
But then I'd look at retailers like Stella that carry these like amazing new brands and houses that look very quote unquote niche to me. They're really exploring new territory and fragrance that I
mhm.
thought wasn't even possible. So then I now have a little bit more hope that that is actually like something that is in existence. But I
I
still think
It's
that
a
there's
lot
a
like
lot of stuff.
music. It's a lot like music, right? You've got all this
Right.
music, and then you've got these
Oh,
deep,
totally.
you can kind of think about, like, I think that we are both of the generation where you had the record shop and you had like
Well,
this
yeah.
snooty people who work there that made you
Yeah.
feel like garbage because you didn't have like the Japanese import of this, that.
I
But
was a
that
record
was
store
you.
employee. I was that.
Uh, mhm. Yeah.
So I know all about that subculture. God,
Oh,
but
like I have to hear more about this. You've really
yeah, we got to talk more offline about my past as a music aficionado too and a DJ. Okay, before we go,
okay.
this is my okay. I thought of something that's definitely snobbier.
Okay.
I hate when people use DNA when they're reviewing fragrances because I feel like it's not really, it's not really based in any kind of like factuality because and the reason why is because DNA to me I always think of like genealogy. I think like
Mhm.
how can two fragrances that are under in a same house have the same DNA when they've been composed by two different perfumers that have two different styles and then yet somebody says they share the same DNA. Like I just don't like the whole DNA thing.
My screaming in the wind, like, can't stand this conversation is anytime someone says that some fragrance is a pheromone fragrance. That drives me bananas.
It's totally baseless. Yeah, there's
Ridiculous.
what? Like you could say it seems like one, but when you straight up say like it is a pheromone fragrance, it's
Also,
like
if there were actual pheromones in something, wouldn't it be regulated? I mean, wouldn't it be like sold like in a hunting store? I don't know.
I think so. But also like I don't think your olfactory receptors can even pick it up and there's no empirical evidence to even suggest that it would make any difference for us to smell
I,
pheromones and get a
I
reaction to it,
I think that when people say a pheromone fragrance, they're really just talking about a mysterious fragrance. And most
Yeah.
quote unquote pheromone ones, they tend to be the ones with really big molecules, right? They're either musky fragrances or woody fragrances. And the fact that some people can smell them, some people can't, just and then sometimes you smell them in certain dilutions, sometimes you don't, sometimes, I think that creates this idea that there's this sort of floating cloud of pheromones that are driving attraction. Um, yeah, but anyway, when people say that, when I see that in marketing, really kind of,
When it's in marketing, ooh, I
yeah.
mean, I was just thinking people who are talking about a fragrance that they're reviewing, but if it's in marketing, it's like,
No, it's like so in the class that I just did on for the Fragrance Alliance Network on sex smells, we smelled that viral rollerball that's supposed to be the original, the OG pheromone fragrance.
I know about that one. Yep.
It's like $14 and it just smells like, I think it smells like mango. It's like it has like a mango note to the top of it. Yeah. And I just think to myself, well, I mean, you know, TikTok is a big place, so they have
Right.
content somewhere. So
It's funny. The marketplace is really funny. Oh, well, one last thing. I like
yeah,
how like there's like a new last thing. Everything's a last thing
last
until there's
thing.
another last
That's
thing.
a good conversation.
This is elusive from Avon. Actually, my last guest
Avon fragrance. Oh my
love my
God.
Avons.
Keeping that under wraps under your desk this whole time. Look at that pearlescent bottle. Oh my goodness.
I'll tell
That
you about this.
that
Derek,
looks
who
like
was my
that looks
last.
like a toilet paper roll should go on top of it.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
This needs one of those like crochet doll head toilet paper
I know
covers.
I know exactly what you're talking about. Where it's like a
Exactly.
plastic doll, but then like the
Exactly.
gown is crocheted. Yeah,
Amazing. This is amazing. This belongs in that bathroom.
yeah. And Derek Varanus Roderi, aka the Scented Devil, he was my guest last time I did Effluvium. Recommended this to us, and I found this for a song. It was $18 plus
Bravo
shipping.
to Avon. Like they have some of the most quirky, funny bottles ever. But this
Like, can we
one,
just talk about this a little bit more? I'm going to zoom in.
but
Like,
this
look
one,
at the
yeah,
detail on this cap. I wish I had like a better focus on this,
it's true.
but it's the detail on the cap is really something.
It's true.
Um,
Oh wow, look at that filigree.
yeah,
But it's the bottle's giving like feminine hygiene product to me.
it totally is. But what the thing about that I love about Avon is you think it's going to smell kind of like so-so, but like most of the time you smell it and you're like, damn, this is good.
Well, I mean, they don't have crap perfumers behind, their fragrances. I mean, it's the same people who are doing everything else.
They really were the same people and they were composing great stuff,
Mhm.
great materials. Um, and this is like a very animalic floral chypre. Like I put this on out like a few hours ago and I still smell like this indolic jasmine and this animalis base. It is like this will really put a tiger in your tank.
And you haven't eaten any garlic at all?
What?
Not a single minced clove?
No,
Mhm.
I accidentally did the other night and I was pissed. This smells really good though. It I don't I think if I it, I think that this could even improve on garlic smell. Like it would overpower it in a good way. But yeah, it is called elusive, which I find really amusing because there's nothing elusive about this fragrance.
Mm.
It's really good though. I recommend it.
Oh, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of, like, real great bargains, like, out there. I think about the fragrances from, like, Yves Rocher back in the day.
Yes.
Great, terrific, icons. Mhm.
I have the Pivouin, which is this
Ooh,
lovely peony
yeah.
Soliflor. Ooh, what is that I hear? I hear the theme music because we'll go backstage. We have a backstage, so we can continue the discussion after we are no longer live.
It'd be great.
Yeah, this is a great discussion. Will you come back when I do the podcast on Substack?
Oh, yeah, I would love that.
That would be
If you'll
awesome.
have me. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Um, we are sentient. I've been looking for this Avon. Derek is my other main influencer apart from you, JJ. I just got the Eau Variant of Signet, Club, and Clint, or Hood. Hood was the European name for that fragrance. Thank you very much, UK. Hit me up later. I'll tell you where I got this track from. All right, everyone, we're going to sign off. Stick around, Daisy. We're going to book into this chat backstage, and I will see you all very soon. Be well.